Why choose a Sleep Number smart bed?
Can I make my site softer?
Can I make my site firmer?
Can we sleep cooler?
Sleep Number does that. Cools up to 8 times faster and lets you choose your ideal comfort on either side. Your Sleep Number setting. It's the Sleep Number biggest sale of the year. All beds on sale. Up to 50% off the limited edition smart bed, plus free home delivery with the purchase of any smart bed. Ends Monday. All Sleep Number smart beds offer temperature solutions for your best sleep. Check it out at a Sleep Number store or sleepnumber.com today.
With so many options, why choose Arizona State University?
For me, the only online option was ASU because of the quality. Their faculty was really involved with their students and care about your personal journey. The dedication to my personal development from my professors, that's been extremely valuable to me.
Earn your degree from the nation's most innovative university. Online. That's a degree better. Explore more than 350 plus undergraduate, graduate, and certificate programs at asuonline.asu.edu.
But my advice would be take your risks, do your seeking, don't be afraid, but stay balanced. Listen to your inner voice, ask yourself questions, use your discernment, and don't ever let somebody else control your identity. And don't ever, forsake your authenticity. Stand in it in all moments. And if you ever feel like your authenticity is something that is being compromised, there's something very, very wrong.
That's Andrew Ryan Profaci, a former member of the Mother God cult. This is the Silver Linings Handbook podcast. I'm Jason Blair. There was a time when every corner I turned around in late 2023 and early 2024, someone was talking about Love Has Won, an HBO documentary series on the Mother God cult. It was a story of a woman, Amy Carlson, who went from a McDonald's manager to a cult leader. The documentary sticks close to Carlson's family and her inner circle, and begins about 3 weeks after the discovery of Carlson's body. Somewhere between 2000 and 2007, depending on which accounts you read, Carlson became interested in New Age philosophy and began posting on internet forums. On one of those forums, she met a man who called himself Amrith White Eagle, who told Carlson that he believed that she was divine. Carlson increasingly began talking about paranormal experiences, and in 2007, she left her third husband, her children, and her job as a manager at a McDonald's in Dallas. At some point, Carlson, who cut off her family entirely, would join White Eagle in Colorado. The group they formed was then known as the Galactic Federation of Light, and they began to build a following online and on YouTube. The cosmology of Love Has Won combined New Age spirituality, conspiracy theories, elements of mainstream religions, and popular culture. In it, Carlson was a 19-billion-year-old being who had birthed all of creation and who had been reincarnated 534 times, including as Jesus Christ, Cleopatra, Joan of Arc, Harriet Tubman, Mother Earth, and the Hawaiian goddess Pele. She claimed she was Elvis Presley's mother in a past life and that Donald Trump was her father in another life. She claimed that she could cure cancer with the power of love. She promoted pseudoscientific cures, including something called colloidal silver, microscopic bits of silver used in jewelry or utensils suspended in water or another base. Needless to say, the FDA warns that it's neither safe nor effective, and it's been noted that it can create a permanent bluish-gray discoloration of skin and organs and lead to kidney, liver, and nervous system damage. It was as if wellness influencers had met QAnon, and in fact, by 2020, the group had adopted elements of the QAnon conspiracy theories, including that COVID-19 was a planned pandemic, 9/11 denial, Holocaust denial, and that the Sandy Hook massacre that left 20 students and 6 staff members at a Connecticut school dead in 2012 was a hoax. There were also recordings of people making anti-Semitic and racist remarks, including support for Adolf Hitler. A core group of a little under 24 members of the group lived in a small town in southeastern Colorado. The group did daily live streams on YouTube in order to obtain donations and to recruit more members. There, they promoted their alternative medicine products, vitamin supplements, and other wares. They offered sessions that they said could remove sickness and negative energy from the body. Ex-members accused the group of physical abuse and sleep deprivation. Carlson appeared in September 2020 in the pop psychology television program Dr. Phil, where she was confronted with allegations of abuse, which she denied. When Hawaiian natives learned that Carlson's group was coming to the mountains near them, they protested en masse. In September 2020, it was reported that Carlson was in poor health and paralyzed from the waist down. In April 2021, Carlson's mummified remains were found in a sleeping bag, wrapped in Christmas lights and with her face covered in glitter, inside a home in Colorado. Apparently, investigators would say that the leader of Love Has Won was suffering the effects of silver poisoning, alcohol abuse, and anorexia, and that the combination led to her death. Instead of taking Carlson to the hospital, as she had asked, her followers refused, saying that she had told them to avoid conventional medicine. The police believe members moved her body around for weeks, hoping she would be reincarnated. When that didn't happen, they moved her back to the home of a member in Colorado named Michael. When that member returned home, he found Carlson's mummified corpse and called the police. Her death and the group's handling of it became flashpoints for discussions about coercive control, spiritual delusion, and legal accountability. It's a testament to the power of belief, that our belief systems can override basic drives for self-care and even for survival. In many ways, the COVID-19 pandemic, with people at home more time to surf the internet, disconnection from people who made counterpoints, and the rising political tensions allow conspiracy theories and delusions to become a part of the mainstream. Today I'm sitting down with Andrew Ryan Profaci, a former member of the Love Has Won cult and author of a memoir, The War on Love. Andrew came to Love Has Won in 2014 after a car accident and recovery from an opioid addiction. During that time, Carlson became his romantic partner, which offered him some unique insight into the leader of the cult and her followers. In many ways, Andrew Ryan knew Carlson on a deeper level than others. He's heard stories from her family members about how when she was young, she used to love to jump on swings and see how high she could go. He had fond memories of those private moments where, no longer a kid and now in her 40s, Carlson would do the same, getting as high as she could go and yelling yippee. She was brilliant and insightful, he says, but there was also a darker side. Today, we're going to talk about community and loss, power and religion, the prevalence of cults hidden behind ideas as well as religious buildings, recovering from trauma and the risks that can happen during a reawakening, especially when the people who are supposed to guide us themselves are lost. We're also going to discuss how to escape conspiratorial thinking that has become all too common in our world. So, Andrew, I just wanted to thank you for coming on. I had mentioned when we were talking off mic that, at the end of 2023, I had caught the HBO documentary. And one of the things that really stuck out to me was I felt like it was all coming together there. I felt like, the Mother God cult that for me, it was the first time I was being uh, exposed to it. It included everything. It included sort of QAnon type conspiracies, a little bit of that wellness influencer vibe, a little bit of those religious cult elements. And, one of the things, and I think I still have the same question today that I had then, which is, both curiosity about what allows what seem like to me perfectly reasonable people who are looking for something good in their life
Right.
to end up in a place like that. And I often come back to this idea that one of the things that we neglect and that we take for granted in life is belonging, and that's so important to people.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm just curious for you, just sort of in thinking about your story. I really found, both in your book and what I read when I was doing my research, I really found it interesting and very familiar on some levels. You had mentioned that you were struggling with things like opioid addiction. You were going through a period of your life where you just really didn't have a lot of direction. You didn't know where you were going. And then, tragedy and trauma hit with a car accident. And, one where you lost somebody, lost a friend. And, those are those moments. And I can think of this with people I've worked with over the years, who have been chronically depressed or struggling with addiction, and then something very traumatic happens. And it's not that people snap out of it, but it gives you an opportunity to rethink things. And I was just curious about, you had said that you didn't want to squander your second chance. And I'm just curious about what that experience was like, what the journey was like through that, and then how that led you ultimately to Amy and Love Is
Yeah.
One.
Yeah, great questions, and I agree with so much of what you said, and especially when those big life events happen, I look at them now as catalyst would be the word that I use. They create a catalyst in our life that changes our direction and gives us a new way of looking at things, a new perspective, and that's what happened for me. And, I've made it a purpose in my life to make the best of those moments because I've had so many happen to me that, could be defined as, pretty terrible. And they were in a lot of ways, but that doesn't mean that something good can't come from them. And that made me realize the catalyst, these experiences that I had, the losing my friend in the car accident, the overcoming the addiction, it made me realize that I was missing something in my life, that I felt, just like you had mentioned earlier, I felt like I was missing a sense of belonging, or I was missing purpose. I was missing a sense of community. And I think when it comes to cults in general, what you find is that people join, for potentially good reasons. Nobody joins a cult saying like, "Hey, I want to join a cult," and the cults aren't saying, "Hey, come join us. We're going to ruin your life and steal your identity and confuse you until you don't know who you are anymore." That's not the tagline. You look at it as something that can potentially make you whole, or that can satisfy either a curiosity or a sense of belonging, or a need that you feel that you have, a meaning, a purpose that it can give you. And that's what I found, and that's what led me towards the cult, was this spiritual seeking. And this is a journey that isn't it's not unique to me. Many people go on this kind of journey, whether they're religious or not. Many people go on this journey of seeking more to life than just the mundane, than just the wake up, go to work, come home, pay your bills, have a car, 2.5 children, and, pay your bills, pay your taxes, live, die, and move on. And for me, I wanted to reach for more. And I know a lot of other people did too. And I think that's where the cults come in, because we look at them like they are a community and they are going to satisfy that desire for belonging. And unfortunately, so many times, humans are susceptible to things like, getting the spotlight or feeling special or, enjoying power, whether it be over other people or, having a following. And we can get lost from the initial intention of doing something good. When I joined Amy Carlson and what would become Love Has Won, it was with the intention of helping humanity to awaken, to recognize that while we were living these lives that we thought were normal, that there was more to life than just the mundane and what we considered to be normal, and that there was, some people would call it salvation, others would call it a sense of belonging or just a sense of satisfaction and awakening that we
Purpose.
wanted to bring.
Yeah,
And
both purpose and belonging.
that's what we were intending, and unfortunately, things got out of hand. Over time, they got out of hand.
Well, one of the things, just sort of like putting it into context, I think sometimes we slip into this idea that, these kinds of groups are conspiracy theories, for example. And I really did appreciate your point that no one opens the door and says, hey, welcome to this cult where we're going to steal your identity. We're going to ruin your life. And, no one goes, hey, I'm going to go find a cult to join. I mean, maybe somebody says, I'm going to go find a cult to start. But people are like, I'm going to go find a cult to start. But, I think it's very easy to slip into the idea that widespread support for these kinds of things or conspiracy theories in general, which seem really absurd when you hear them years afterwards. But it's really easy to think that this is some kind of invention or symptom of our modern digital society. But, in reality, back in the dark ages, like witch hunts were based on the belief that, young women gathered in the woods, were conspiring with the devil. And there are even societies today that still sort of like accuse enemy tribes of things like sorcery. So I think like conspiracy theories and this idea, whether it's the JFK assassination or you can go back much further into time, I think they're kind of a natural thing, human thing to wonder what's behind the door that I'm not being told.
Absolutely.
But I think that's also a powerful hook because people in life were just naturally looking for answers. And so someone who comes and says, hey, everything you're unhappy right now and everything you've been told, or a ton of what you've been told is a lie. And that's why you're not happy. It gives you this opportunity for purpose, belonging, and the answers. And that's a real powerful allure, I think.
It is powerful. And I think the word that comes to mind for me is where it goes wrong is balance, because while it's okay to have these questions, and some of them might be quite legitimate when it comes to some conspiracy theories. I mean, if you look at it just from, a very dispassionate view on some conspiracy theories, there might be, something there that is worth looking into. But a lot of the times with these cults, they lose their sense of balance and they begin on all of the conspiracy theories, and they're all true. Everywhere you look, it's all a lie. Your entire life, you've been lied to about everything. Your history books are a lie. Your religions are a lie. And that's where it goes wrong, is because they lose this sense of balance. They lose their objectivity. And instead, they find power and realize that, the hook is the conspiracy. Just like you said, the conspiracies are the hook. So I believe leaders like Amy, for instance, see the value in leaning towards and leaning on those conspiracy theories. So, the more that she can, attach herself to those conspiracy theories, the better chance she has to, hook more people.
What was it like for you when you first became exposed and joined Love Is One, and what was that progression like in terms of going from sort of being engaged, interested, curious, to even more engaged to then concerned?
Yeah, I had, some unique experiences that really started me down the path. I was into spirituality. I was into, conspiracy theories, but they weren't, as big a part of my life. It was just kind of like a little hobby that I would do if I was bored and, on the computer and wanted to look up something. I look up conspiracy theories and watch a couple videos. But I had a couple of experiences through meditation that completely collapsed my worldview. And, I experienced some things that were not supposed to be possible based on what I thought reality was. And through these experiences that I had in meditation, one was, seeing a vision and having words pop into my head. Another one was hearing an audible voice calling out to me in the middle of meditation as if somebody was standing behind me, speaking to me. And another was I was on the beach and saw a blue orb floating over my head for 10 minutes while I was out there playing with my dog. And these few things happened within the course of just a couple weeks. Within 2 weeks, all of these things happened within. And they completely collapsed my worldview. And I had just been, at that time, coming on to the Love As One group and into their chat room. And, Amy claimed she had the answers. Here were people that understood what I was beginning to ask as far as questions about reality. I felt distance between myself and my family and my friends who weren't having these experiences or looking in this direction or seeking in this direction. And here were these people, gathering together, creating what looked like a positive community. And they all understood what it was that I was concerned about and thinking about. And it felt like very attractive to me to join a community of people who understood and wanted to take all of that energy and that intention and use it to help other people awaken to the fact that there's more to reality than we realize, and we can help the world.
It's interesting when I hear you say that, and when I think about that, it was really interesting. So you mentioned there were these 3 experiences that you felt that kind of just rocked your world, right?
Yeah.
And you mentioned seeing the blue orb in the beach.
Correct.
And you mentioned hearing the voice.
Correct.
And I kind of thought to myself, as you were talking about those 3 things, I just thought to myself, and you made the point that you just didn't think they were possible. As you were talking about it, I was like, oh, all of this is possible. I mean, like medically, scientifically, it's possible to hear voices that are from people who are physically not there. And I think so scientifically, we know, right? There's this thing called hallucinations that exist.
Sure.
But then spiritually, right? We have this whole element of our spiritual society who believes in those things, like I know after my mom died, feeling her presence afterwards, and definitely having moments where I thought I saw her in the room. And I wonder how much of sort of like your susceptibility in that particular moment may have been sort of like what you were rooted in before. Because, for example, tonight, if I woke up and I saw someone, for me, there would be some combination of a spiritual and a scientific explanation. And I would be surrounded by people, even if they totally didn't believe me, would be absolutely open to indulging in that moment. And I think, so what I think, and I'm trying to imagine putting myself in my shoes, at the moment in life where I felt most isolated, I don't know that I would have had those people that I could have talked to about something like that and been totally accepted and, questioned, but not questioned from an attacking perspective, but from a curious perspective. And I wonder whether you were, as those things were happening, you were at just a very vulnerable point in your life in terms of support.
I think you're onto something. My worldview was crashing, and it created a gaping hole in my belief system. What is reality? What is truth? What is true and what isn't? And when those events happened, I had a choice. I could either, go with the magic potential of reality, that maybe there is this magical potential of reality to tap into through meditation or, through other ways. And maybe the magic is real, or maybe I am having a hallucination. And I guess in those moments, you really do have a choice, and you could go one of two ways. And
although I would also argue it's also possible those two things are not mutually exclusive, because I think
that's a good point.
Yeah, I think I'll never forget. I was in a psychiatric hospital when I was first diagnosed with bipolar, Silver Hill in Connecticut, and there was this guy he was a kid who was off at college. He had his first manic episode. It was with psychotic features. He was having hallucinations. The way he got hospitalized was he went to the president of the university's office and conference room, and he was having God delusions, and he felt like he had to give him the answers. And, years later, in talking to the guy who was then a young man, I think it was actually a spiritual experience for him. It shifted him, and it changed him. And it's just interesting to think that sometimes what feels like an either or that we're trying to get someone to answer, maybe a both, if that makes sense.
No, I think, that's a really great point. And, I wish I had the answers. I wish I had the foresight back then to even consider it. But, what is that? That really is the question, if we want to go there. What is reality and what isn't? And, you have all these people who get to this point where they're asking themselves this question. And the cult, this community that looks positive and has all these positive intentions, they claim to have all of the answers. And to people who don't have, maybe more of a rock solid group of people around them that they can lean on, or people who don't feel like they have the support system that they need, they look to this community to become that. And that's the hook, I think, of where people fall into joining these communities, which more often than not inevitably become something much darker than intended, and have these insidious undercurrents to them that over time become more and more prominent, which is what happened in this case. And it took some time, but eventually, I figured it out. To your question earlier, asked not just about the beginning, but about, how the osmosis of it, realizing that this wasn't all positive. And, it was from watching, really taking in Amy and the way she led the team. And I realized that there was a lot more control. There was a lot less, discussion than I anticipated. They're, asking questions about why she thinks she's Mother God, or, why do you think, just because you have these feelings that you're supposed to be God, that you are God? Like, these questions weren't welcome. You weren't supposed to ask them. And if you did, you didn't get responses. Instead, you were shunned or laughed at and made to feel smaller, that you were in your ego just because you weren't believing. And, it was watching this happen that really began to change my mind and help me realize that, this is not what it was, portrayed to be.
And you first found them online? Is that how you connected?
Yeah, I found them through their website. They aggregated articles. It should have been my first. What gave it away at first, I didn't realize. But what they did is they would go and steal everybody's articles from their websites and post them all to their website every day. And it made it easy for you to not have to search left and right for all the different articles you wanted to see, because you could go to one website and get them all. But I didn't really realize they're essentially hijacking everybody else's content and posting it in one place. and that's how I found them. And they had there was a little button in the top right corner that says, join our chat room. And I joined the chat room, and, one thing led to another. I ended up becoming a regular, and that's how I found them. And then, that's what opened the door to joining the team.
Yeah. And, when you were describing before, you were describing that experience of like questions were not welcomed. And that if you did ask those questions, as opposed to just accepting it, you were made to feel small, or you were ostracized on some level. Well, to me, that sort of sounds like the classic definition of coercive control, right? So,
no doubt.
I praise you if you do what I want, and I make sure the punishment for not doing what I want is so severe that you'll never want it. But I do it subtly, right? I do it subtly, so it's not crystal clear in that sense. And I think a lot of people, look at that from the outside, and they sort of think to themselves, "Oh, I'll never slip into that." And it sounds like you caught some of the vibe somewhat early. But I like to remind people that people would not use coercive control if it didn't work so often. It really does. And I wonder, what was it, I think, about you that for you think that set off the warning signs?
For me, it was the fact that I had those experiences, those inexplicable spiritual experiences on my own. They really, made me feel committed to growth. And I recognized that these coercive control methods were going to be stunting my growth. And I recognized that I had to essentially challenge the belief system and grow beyond it, because Amy labeled herself as the pinnacle of human growth potential and spiritual growth potential. She considered herself perfect because she was divine. She was God. She had no ego. But meanwhile, I'm watching her with, alcoholism every night. I'm watching her, doing something I call past polishing, which is where she's turning all the stories of her past into reasons why she was meant to be Mother God. I'm watching her piggybacking off of every story that somebody tells her about something incredible that happened to them, and she injects herself into their story, such as saying, "Oh yeah, Andrew, when you had your spiritual experiences, that was me that called out to you. That was me you heard. That was me that sent your higher self these images or these ideas, or sent this orb for you to see." And I realized that she had stopped growing, and because of that, She, you're either growing or you're shrinking. You're never just staying the same. And I recognize that. And I recognize that I needed to grow beyond the belief system that she had created.
It's kind of interesting in listening to what you're saying. I was just sort of thinking to myself, like every conspiracy theory movement I think I've come across in my mind, offers you the sort of like real answers, in the background. But I kind of think of it this way. They're all very populist, right? So, I am gathering you all together and because of this, you're going to go on your own unique spiritual journey where your life is going to get better. There are going to be all these fruits for you, member, and I think to myself that there are like true believers in these moments, but inevitably in any of these moments, I kind of think of it a lot about like what's happening in Washington right now and the unfolding things around Jeffrey Epstein, that conspiracy theory.
Yeah.
This idea like, okay, we're going to release all these files because there's all this horrible stuff. And it reminds me of like the old Pizzagate conspiracy, like the Democrats, secretly have, are running a child predator arm. But it's not like a right left thing for me or a political thing, but it's this idea that these very kind of noble reasons, right? Because we generally do not like child predators, right? We don't want there to be child predators out there.
Right.
We all these, I think, things inevitably people have very noble reasons, but inevitably there is a person who comes in and takes advantage of it. And, I think of with like just taking the QAnon example, a lot of these supporters for these groups are very populist. They are very, they are struggling. There are real reasons why, they feel disenfranchised in our society.
Sure.
Yeah,
Sure.
I think that stuff is very real, but inevitably they come across a couple leaders who, are just willing to take advantage of that. Like the moment that sticks in my head recently is like when they were passing the House budget bill and they were like, there are no Medicare cuts in this at all. And people were like, yeah, no Medicare cuts. And I'm thinking to myself, no, like right there, you can see them. Right there. Like, how do these people bend reality?
It's a good question.
Yeah, and I just wonder since you were somebody who gravitated toward the group and you gravitated toward Amy in the beginning, how did she bend reality?
She was a master at it. She had become so well practiced because, she had to be practiced because she was, constantly challenged, whether it be somebody just joining a chat room or throwing questions at her in front of other people, even though they were believers. She had to defend herself. She had become so well practiced. And she was inherently intelligent and charismatic. So she had the ability to really, twist and turn logic and do what I call mental gymnastics, where she would just twist and turn logic and explain things in ways that, made sense logically. But, if you started asking questions back and forth, you could get to the root of it and pull it all apart. But that wasn't allowed. She would do her mental gymnastics, and that was the end of the conversation. It wasn't like you and me are talking right now, like, let's kick it back and forth and, see if we can get to the root of it. That wasn't allowed. It was, here's the truth. I'm Mother God, so believe it. And, that was one of the ways. And, another reason was because people didn't want to get a target on their back. They didn't want to step out of line and have the rest of the group, laughing at them like Amy would usually do. She would, start laughing at you and, get the others to join in and kind of single you out that way. And, she would shame you. And, she would, she just, she really was good at twisting logic in ways that made sense at a very superficial level and never ever went any deeper than that. And I just didn't accept it. And that's why within the group, I ended up becoming a pariah of sorts. But nobody else ever seemed to have the courage to ask these questions that were so obvious. Instead, they would just trade looks with each other like, yeah, I don't really believe it, but we're just going to, play along because it's just easier to do that for now because they've been cut off from their families. Their wallets have been washed in the sense that they have no more money. They have no way to go home. They feel stuck and there's nothing to do but just go along. And that's kind of just what happens. And, people just give up and just go along with it. And it was so strange to me. It felt like I was stuck in a twilight zone, to tell you the truth, because here I was looking at people who were otherwise intelligent and had great intentions, and we're watching, an alcoholic telling us stories while she is literally, on her 6th or 7th highball of vodka, claiming to be Mother God, while she's at McDonald's spreading love and light in this evil corporation and telling stories about how she's always meant to be Mother God, and they're just lapping it up. And I'm thinking to myself, like, what is going on here? I felt like I said, like I was in the twilight zone. Like something just happens where people join and they just give up and acquiesce everything to her.
Well, it's interesting. It's that thing you say about logic. And, I'll take a point of, the vast majority of people may not think that, I'm going to pick somebody out of the air right now, that Alex Jones is all that logical, right? But if all you watch is Alex Jones, right, and you don't take in any other inputs, there is a certain kind of logic that runs through what he says. But what I think about logic isn't really logic unless you're intellectually honest and you have an open mind. Because once you use sort of skills at logic, but you define and you confine how big the box is, as I like to say. The box of ideas in reality is this big. And within this box of ideas, I can make a very logical argument. And everyone has to ignore what's outside of that box of ideas, which is also reality.
Exactly.
And so I think if your information is all coming from within that box, a lot of things can sound really logical unless you have experience with other things, or you've gone, or you're regularly being exposed to other things. So I see what you mean in the sense,
You're getting to the heart of it now, and that's where the isolation comes in. That isolation is where is what makes that possible. Just like, if you said, if all you listen to is Alex Jones and you don't listen to anything else, then that is your reality. If all you do is live with Mother God's group and you don't turn on a TV, which nobody ever did, you don't listen to the radio, you don't take in information from anywhere else, then those belief systems become your reality. So all of the conversations, all of the questions, all of the ideas that you have are birthed from within that belief system. So there's really nothing that exists outside of that belief system anymore. And that isolation is that you're encapsulated in a bubble and you're cut off from reality, as you said. So all you see is the belief system right in front of you, and that's all you have to work with. And that's why it becomes so easy to just go along and to lose yourself and to fall so far away from, where the rest of society or reality may be. because you've been trapped in this bubble and, you've been isolated from everything you know.
That actually reminds me of 9/11 in one sense. And, my 9/11 experience, I was in New York, and I was
Really?
working that day. Yeah,
Wow.
I was out in Brooklyn. I did not see the first plane, but I saw the second plane
Wow.
hit the Trade Center towers. And I remember getting to Ground Zero that evening or night. It was just off Ground Zero. It wasn't exactly there that night where I had this thought. And I remember thinking to myself, because the FBI, one of the things that was happening in the background as this was going on, FBI was working with a flight manifest to identify who was on the planes. Right. And so in the newsroom where I was working, it was becoming very clear that on several of these planes, there were multiple hijackers. And I think we were like, by that afternoon, we knew it was at least 17 plus or something like that. And I thought to myself, what causes 17 people? It's not all mental illness. It's not all being sociopaths. It's not all, with a group that big, with an N that big, it's not all any of the common denominators. Not to say that there wasn't one of each of those or a couple of each of those in there. And what I spent the next 20 years learning, many of, through reading, through covering things, I learned that it's a mix of kind of two things. One is, if you live in a reality, people say this all the time. If you watch MSNBC all the time, or you watch Fox News all the time, well, if you grew up in Cairo, and you're from a family whose family members are a part of the Islamic Jihad, who were persecuted by, Egyptian presidents for generations, or you grew up in Kandahar, or you grew up in a Wahhabist community in Saudi, and that is the only news you had about America, then what those hijackers did makes a lot more sense, right? From that perspective, because in their worldview, that is Satan. That is the end of the world. It is why, my uncle, my father ended up in jail, why these people were tortured, why we're poor. It is the reason for all of those things, looking in that very small box that they have. Then I think the second thing that's at play is there's a little bit of truth to it, right? I think of like the Epstein conspiracy. Like, it's true. He is a child predator who had an island. It's true. His death was a little weird, right? Like, I don't buy the conspiracy theories, but there's a little bit of truth in there. And there's a little bit of truth that America has not historically been like the world's greatest nation, and at times will turn blind eyes to things. So that combination of the isolated information and a little bit of truth to it, I feel like, and this is where I see that comparison between cults and radicalization in other areas, is that it's the limits on information, the charisma of the leaders, the little bit of truth, all that stuff comes together. And if you get a skilled manipulator, they can convince you that anything is righteous.
Everything's on the table.
Yeah.
You're right. 100%. And she was very intelligent. She was well spoken in her case, but you're absolutely right. You take a little dose of truth and a lot of isolation, and anything becomes possible when you have a charismatic, intelligent leader who is well spoken and can think on their feet. That's really all it takes, and anything becomes possible. And just like you said, those hijackers on 9/11, to them, they were doing God's work, right? To us, they're doing something that was so evil. It's beyond it's beyond you can't fathom it.
But we're all, to the point you're getting at, we're all operating with very different data set.
Exactly.
You know what I mean?
All isolated from each other. Yeah,
Mhm.
absolutely.
Which I wonder whether some element of some of these things are, like more transparency and more exposure to to different ideas and cultures and approaches, and sort of bringing down barriers may help. But
Yeah,
one of
100%.
the things that really stuck out to me when I was looking at videos of Amy from the early years, um, and then some of the reporting and coverage around 2020 when she went on Dr. Phil, and then even beyond that, it seemed like a very different person. The Amy of 2014, 2015 seemed like what I would call a lot of my crystal clutching friends.
Yeah.
And like, they're my friends who believe in the power of crystals, and like they're not way out there, right? Like they have different kinds of spiritual views than me or whatever it is, but it's not that wild. But then
Sure.
I watched the transformation of um of Amy, and she almost seemed unrecognizable to me as a lay outsider. But did
Yeah.
you, back in the early days, see seeds of what like some of the problems, the abuse, the other things like that? And then when you found out that she had died, could you ever imagine that that's the way it would have ended?
Yeah. Well,
Because basically her own conspiracy consumed her.
right. Well, that I saw coming. Yeah. I didn't think it would consume her in as far as death. Um, I guess that potential was always on the table, but no, I didn't see that coming. But I actually believe, and I don't mean to prop myself up, but I believe I actually was her fork in the road, and
Huh.
I was her divergent point where she made her choice. I offered her the path towards reality, towards balance, and towards all of the good intentions that we had set out to in the beginning, towards healing whatever it was inside her that she had been running from and needed the mother god persona to protect her from, which is another story. But I was essentially that, that catalytic point where I was the fork in the road. I
Let
gave
me
her one
let,
choice and she went the other way, and yeah, I could see it
let me
coming
jump in here.
100%.
What do you think she was running from?
It's a great question, and it has to be trauma. When she would get really intoxicated at night, she would tell stories every night. Or, for 10 months that I was there, every night it would get to a point where Amy got so drunk that she just started talking. And she would tell stories about her past and being a little girl. And she would cry. And then she would laugh and she would yell and she'd get angry. Then she'd go back to crying. And you could see that there was a lot of unresolved trauma there for her. And we played it very close to the vest, even with me, as somebody who got very close to her, in a very personal way, closer than other people got. I mean, by the end, I heard she had followers who never even really met her, but lived in like the complex but never really knew her. I mean, I saw who she was, and there was definitely something there, and she didn't want anybody to know. And there is, to an extent, there is some more there that I have been sworn to secrecy about.
Mm-hmm.
That, and I will keep that promise because that's just I intend to make good on it. But it was clear that she had unresolved trauma from her past that she did not want to deal with.
Yeah.
And
It's interesting. You use that phrase, unresolved trauma from your past.
Yeah.
I it's when it's unresolved, it's your present. You know what I
You
mean?
know,
Yeah.
that's such a good way of putting it. You're right. It never leaves you, and it controls you in ways you don't even realize. You're so right.
What was it you suggested to her?
That she didn't need a title to be powerful. That she didn't need to think she was God, serve humanity, to help awaken people, to help people, to carry out the mission that was so important to her that she thought was her mission as Mother God. She could completely do the same thing as Amy. The difference was that when she had to be Mother God, she created a standard for herself that was impossible to live up to. This standard of perfection. And I think it was the being unable to meet this standard that really ate at her in a way that she didn't recognize and she didn't pay attention to. And
Hence
I think
the drinking, hence
yeah, it snuck up on her, and that's inevitably what led to her demise. Yes.
Yeah, I see how the connection was there. That she couldn't. Did she consider the idea at all?
Yeah, she had moments where she totally broke out of the shell that was Mother God. She admitted to me on several occasions she wasn't God. And she had seen the light. I had been going to work for months. I mean, every day I was fighting against this Mother God persona in front of the team. It wasn't a secret. I mean, I was battling her in front of the whole team every day, nonstop. But it was Michael, really, who it was like a proxy war between me and Michael, because Michael was the one who kept grounding her back in this delusion. Don't listen to Andrew. He's trying to ruin everything that we're building here. Do not listen to him. You are Mother God. You know this. And, he would rattle off, a couple of things that, she thought is what made her Mother God. And he would just ground her right back in that delusion. But I had her on so many occasions, admitting, crying, even, realizing that she wasn't Mother God. And, she even left the cult behind and came and joined me after I left the cult. And one of the stipulations for coming to live with me after I had left the cult was that she had to leave this behind her, that I didn't expect it overnight. And I knew it wasn't right for me to ask it of her, but I knew the only way that she was going to snap out of it is if she stopped talking with Michael. Yeah, so I said, I know this isn't right of me to ask you, but the only way I'm going to allow you to come and live with me now that I've lived across the country and left is if you cut off Michael. And she agreed and promised me that, she was going to leave the titles behind, that she was going to work on it. Didn't expect it overnight, but that was what she was going to do. And she came and lived with me in Florida, but it was all lip service. She just wanted me back. She never really did cut Michael off, but there were several moments where I had her close. And if, even in the end, if you have seen the videos of the girls, Hope and Aurora, almost bragging about a moment when Mother God requested that they get her medical attention and medical help, and they said no. And then they also talked about how she had this moment where she broke down, where she said, what if I made this all up? What if I'm crazy? What if I'm not Mother God? And they had to tell her, no, you are Mother God, that you're not crazy. Yes, this is real. And, they bragged about it on a YouTube video. And, when I saw that, it made me so angry. And it brought me back to those moments where, I almost had her snapped out of it. And just like the moment when I walked into the house the first time I ever saw Mother God, she was almost falling out of her chair, drunk and tripping on mushrooms, and Michael was holding her up in the chair. And, that image became what it led to her demise, Michael holding her up in the Mother God delusion and not letting her fall out of it. And I just, I think of that image all of the time because it really was Michael who really grounded her back in this delusion and all the moments that I got her to snap out of it.
You had a real friendship with her.
Yeah.
Like, you
Yes.
really had something real. It, it must be so, your emotions must be so mixed. How do you
Yeah.
feel about
Yeah.
her?
It is a mix. It's a little bit of everything. I loved Amy very much. I couldn't stand Mother God, and I served Amy like a queen, and I fought Mother God with everything I had in me. With every ounce of intelligence and wit I had, I went to war with Mother God on a daily basis. But on a daily basis, I served Amy like a queen, like I would serve any woman I was in love with or cared for. Getting in all the ways that you could take care of a person, I did. I became a babysitter to her every night when she was drinking because she couldn't walk straight. I had to hold her on her hips when she walked to the bathroom or when she got up so she wouldn't walk into doors. I mean, she had bruises all the time. And, she couldn't hold, sharp objects. It was like having a toddler around. And, I really found I found a lot of good. And I was very proud of myself of the way I took care of Amy. But Mother God, I did my best to absolutely dismantle and destroy. And if it wasn't for Michael, I think I probably would have succeeded.
I wanted to ask you, like, in thinking about people who are in the spot that you were before you ever walked into Love is One, who are feeling like, whether it's coming off of some amount of trauma or aimlessness, and they're feeling this opportunity to be reinvigorated, because I wouldn't want to discourage people from searching ideas and finding them.
Sure.
Is there any, like, in looking back and thinking of both yourself and the people who sort of got pulled into it, is there any advice you'd give people who are at that moment? Because I think we're all at moments where we feel confused about the world and our purpose and our belonging. And we all have moments, like you said, these catalysts, whether they're good catalysts or they're bad events that propel us. Like, is there any advice you have for people in those spots?
Absolutely. I mean, look, seeking truth, purpose, meaning, whatever it is worth it. 100%. If that's what you feel compelled to do, do it. Absolutely. I mean, I wish everybody would, go on some kind of spiritual journey, but I would also say don't be afraid to take risks. But at the same time, you have to have the one thing that we didn't have, and that was balance. You have to have balance, and you have to have discernment. You have to not dive in head first without thinking. Hold on to your discernment, ask questions, listen to your gut, stay in balance, and don't ever let somebody else define your identity. Don't ever let someone else define who you are. That's one of the biggest things that Amy did. She would name cast everybody that joined the group and assign them titles. Mother God, it was Archangel Michael, Archangel Lucifer, you're Horus, you're Saint Paul or Peter, and she would give people these titles and these things to live up to, and then she controlled their identity, and if they got out of line, she would say, oh, you're not this person anymore, you're not holding this energy that's left you. And it was a way for her to control. But my advice would be take your risks, do your seeking, don't be afraid, but stay balanced. Listen to your inner voice, ask yourself questions, use your discernment, and don't ever let somebody else control your identity. And don't ever, ever forsake your authenticity. Stand in it in all moments. And if you ever feel like your authenticity is something that is being compromised, there's something very, very wrong.
I like that. I like that heuristic. All right. Well, thank you, Andrew. I really appreciate it. I enjoyed this conversation, and
Me too. You're welcome.
take care. If you'd like to join me for discussions with other listeners, we can be found on most social media platforms, including a listener-run Facebook group called the Silver Linings Fireside Chat. For deeper conversations with our guests and live conversations with other listeners, you can also join us on our Patreon at www.patreon.com/The Silver Linings Handbook.